Okay, so I guess we'll go ahead and get moving and let's get started. So also welcome everyone. I'm really happy to see that we have such a diverse group of international participants. I'm Mike Kirsch. I'm the Director of International Sales here at COMM-TEC. My colleague Sergej Michajlin is responsible for Epiphan, among other products. We have today participants from Germany, Switzerland, Poland, Czech Republic, Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, Bulgaria, Romania, Hungary. Boy, it sounds like I'm the presenter of a Eurovision Song Contest here. No, it's really great to have so many people. I mean, Epiphan is a solution that really needs no introduction from me. Certainly, it's the premier manufacturer for streaming and recording solutions. But today we'd like to focus a little bit more on not just Epiphan's excellence in streaming and recording, but really go deeper into the applications, possibilities for event streaming and for the broadcast applications. And that's kind of the point today. And to that end, I'm really pleased that George Herbert has agreed to do this webinar for us. George Herbert is the head of support and training for Epiphan. And he joins us live today from Ottawa in Canada, where he tells us it's extremely hot. We'll forgive him for sweating a little bit here during this presentation. Before I turn it over to him, if you all have any technical questions, no problem. Just write them in the chat, and we'll take them on, and we'll put them in due time. We'll get to all of your questions. And if you want to request your question in German, it's also no problem. Sergej and I, we can translate for that. So in case, falls jemand nur auf Deutsch sich ausdrücken möchte, ist ja kein Problem. Schreibe einfach eure technical Frage auf Deutsch und wir übersetzen es für euch. Okay, so I will pass then the floor over to George. George, please take over.
Perfect, thanks guys. I've gone ahead and turned my camera off because it looks like it's just kind of given up. So I apologize for everyone not being able to see me. Very much apologize. For anyone who's familiar with Epiphan and has seen any of our content, videos, or some of our own webinars, you'll be very familiar with my face, so I don't think that you will be missing it very much today. But today we wanted to talk about using Epiphan Pearl systems for live events. That's really what today is all about, and really talking about how we can use them. So we have a little bit of an agenda today. Just want to quickly run through what we're going to talk about. We're going to do a little bit of a Pearl system overview. What is Pearl and how do we use them and some of the capabilities. Some of the key features that Pearls offer for live production. The differences between Pearl models. There are 3 different models in the Pearl family now. We'll do a little bit of a live demo through the user interface on a Pearl. And then, of course, we will also dive into your questions, which is maybe the most important part of this. We want to make sure that we address any of the questions you have about Pearl, Epiphan, and how you might use it within live production. So let's dive straight in to the Pearl systems overview. The idea with Pearl is to provide a standalone, dedicated piece of hardware that can assist us in streaming and recording of live events and many other different functions and different markets. There are 3 different models, as I mentioned already, and they all share the same design philosophy, and that being to provide a dedicated appliance that is versatile, reliable, easy to use, and professional quality. And this is very important for us here at Epiphan, and all Pearl models start from this design philosophy. The general concept of using an all-in-one video production system is, instead of more traditionally maybe having a rack that's filled with a whole bunch of different gear like switchers and separate recorders and separate streaming encoders and splitters and scalers and lots of cables running between all these devices, is to condense that down into a single standalone device, which reduces the number of points of failure, improves reliability in many cases, also mostly just makes it a lot easier to use, makes it more portable, and a lot of other advantages. And that's the idea with Pearl. Record, stream, switch, do that all simultaneously on a single dedicated piece of hardware. Of course, sometimes we just need something a little basic. Maybe we're adding it on to an existing production workflow. That's where something like Pearl Nano, which is the newest entry into the Pearl family, comes into play. And we're going to dive into a lot more detail on the differences between the three models. But Pearl 2 and Pearl Mini are kind of that bigger all-in-one standalone production, where Pearl Nano is sort of that perfect fit for very small scale, lightweight events, or maybe as the add-on to an existing workflow and infrastructure for production needs. So what are some of the key features for live production that we've tried to build into the Pearl products? Well, the first one is multiple points of control. We have multiple ways of controlling the functions on a Pearl, from built-in screens directly on the front of the devices that allow us to control basic functions like start, stop, and switching, to browser-based UIs where we can control those in any web browser from basically any type of device that has a web browser, to local consoles where we can connect monitors, keyboard, mice, and access the administrator UI that way. And also a secondary web browser-based UI that we call Epiphan Live that's geared to be more of an operator dashboard as opposed to a full administrator interface. And we can also add to that API controls for external device control as well. So there's a lot of ways of controlling Pearls that could fit just about any need in any scenario. The front screens, as I mentioned, are a fantastic way on the go, on the fly, to get those basics going, right? Switching, monitoring, start, stop, that kind of thing. And Epiphan Live kind of duplicates a lot of that functionality remotely, which is something that a lot of customers really enjoy because they can load it on something like a tablet or a smartphone or again, anything that has a web browser, but it's much more visual, shielding a lot of the deeper kind of admin level functions, so that maybe our day-to-day operators that shouldn't have a very deep control can do the routine things of monitoring, start, stop, switching, that kind of thing from Epiphan Live as opposed to the full administrator panel. Now, of course, that full administrator panel is accessed using just a web browser. There's no need to install any software. Pearls are a network-based appliance, so that means that we don't need to have a dedicated machine with specific software installed. We can do it from anything. That could be as simple as a Chromebook to, as something as fancy as a $5,000 laptop. It doesn't matter. Anything with a web browser could access it. What that also means is that it's very possible to remotely access Pearls from outside the local network, depending on the type of setup you want. And when I get into the live demo, I'll actually show you one way we can do that. Of course, we've also have the option for a local console where we can enable one of the HDMI output ports on the Pearl to display the administrator interface, and then we can connect a USB mouse, USB keyboard mouse to control that function. This is something that works amazing, especially in the case of Pearl 2, where it has two HDMI outputs. And again, we'll get into more detail there. But that gives us a ton of flexibility for how we can use those HDMI outputs to not only have the local console, but also to view our content for confidence monitoring. Another option is that on certain models like Pearl Mini and Pearl Nano, we have the flexibility of storage options, but we also have a ton of flexibility on all models for the types of content we create. So we can choose different, kind of industry standard file formats like AVI, MOV, MP4, MPEG-TS. And then we can store those files in a variety of options or manage those files in a variety of ways. So initially we would store it on storage that's built into the device, like a built-in SSD on Pearl 2 or an SD card on Pearl Mini or Pearl Nano. But we can manage those files by transferring them automatically to external storage over USB or even over the network. So this gives us a ton of options for how we move and manage that content once we've finished recording it. Another big advantage when we're talking about live production, of course, is making the production look the way we want it to look. And Pearls all have a customizable layout designer, which is a click and drag, free-form, totally flexible method of choosing the size, the positioning, the cropping of our video inputs. We can also use images and text overlays to customize it, to brand it, to do all these various different pieces that can be important to really make the production polished and look good. And that's, of course, ultimately the goal when we're doing any live production, is that we want what is delivered to our viewers to look good, sound good, and to keep them more engaged. And so the layout designer built into Pearls gives us that ability. Now, this usually comes up in every webinar I do these days, and I think everyone's experience over the past nearly year and a half of the pandemic. The question is always, okay, but how do I do it with Zoom or Teams or GoTo or whatever it is? And while Pearls do not directly integrate with video conferencing platforms, Pearls can be a great companion to a workflow using video conferencing. And by that, I mean, we can ingest the video signals from computers running video conferencing software, and then using things like the cropping tools and the different positioning tools, we can kind of clean up the look of that a little bit and then send it out as a live stream or record it maybe a little bit better than those conferencing platforms can themselves. So participants can all be within that need the two-way communication and need to hand off different presenter modes. They can all participate in the conference. But our viewers, if we have just bulk viewers, hundreds, thousands of viewers potentially, it's impractical to have them all join a video conference. So using something like Pearl as a companion to that means we can capture the video signals and audio signals of what's happening in that meeting, clean it up a little bit visually using the cropping tools and other functions in the layout designer, maybe even bring in different video signals at the same time, and then send out our stream and record from Pearl. So this could be a great companion workflow, as I said. Another very important part, of course, is sometimes we don't know what we're going to encounter out there from a networking perspective. Sometimes it is just as simple as going into a space and plugging in Ethernet, and we get an automatically assigned DHCP address in order to get on the network, and that's it. But more and more these days, that's not the case. And so we've made sure that Pearls have just about everything you could maybe encounter or need in the field, where we can do automatic DHCP or static address assignments from a network perspective. If it's in a permanent installation where there's a domain present and we need to authenticate with that domain, we have LDAP authentication and integration built into Pearls. We can do role-based access from administrators to operators to just viewers on the Pearls themselves. We can roll that into the LDAP authentication as well. If some of the newer networks have requirements for things like 802.1x or HTTPS as part of their security mandates, Pearls have all of these options built into them as well. And that's not something you can say for many other AV products on the market. And it's important to us to provide this level of security as these types of protocols become more and more expected and required in a variety of situations. And lastly, and we're going to dive into this a little bit more, Epiphan Cloud can be a fantastic tool for remotely monitoring, remotely configuring, and remotely controlling Pearls from the cloud. This is a newer platform from Epiphan, and it's exactly how I'm going to do the live demo a little later today, where we can pair our different Pearl devices to our cloud account and basically remotely monitor what's happening with them, start and stop recording remotely, and if our account is set up at one of the professional levels of it, we can even remotely dive into the full administrator interface and control every aspect of the Pearl. So if we're someone who's managing a fleet of devices, this can be an amazing tool. And I do have some examples of that. Some of our customers in the United States who have fleets of Pearl Minis that they deploy to different live events all across the US. They manage them all remotely using Epiphan Cloud. And it's something that means they can send less people on site to manage that gear, and they can have people in a central office doing a lot of that administration work. And that's been a huge time saver for them, but also a huge cost saver because they're flying less people, paying for less hotel rooms, but still delivering a huge amount of value from a service perspective. Now, as I kind of alluded to, there are kind of two different levels of cloud. There is a free plan that anyone can sign up for anytime. You can go to epiphan.cloud and sign up for an account. This allows you for basic device management where you can monitor the devices. You can even start and stop streaming remotely. The Pro plans start to add a few higher level advanced features, like the full direct remote login to the administrator interface or batch actions. So if you have a large fleet and you need to update them all at the same time to the latest firmware, with a Pro plan, you could do that. So there's a few advanced pieces there that can help the larger scale customers. The Pro plans, of course, are a paid plan. So you could check that out at epiphan.com/cloud or epiphan.cloud for a lot more information. So let's take a look at the differences between the three different models. As I mentioned earlier, Pearl now as a family consists of three distinct model variants. And you can kind of look at this and kind of consider it a small, medium, and large type of a menu. We have the Pearl Nano at the entry level, the smallest, lightest weight, most basic, and lowest cost, of course. And it's designed to be that simple, perfect fit for a few different use cases we're going to highlight. Pearl Mini is where we start to really get into that all-in-one standalone production box, but maybe for a more simplified, smaller scale live production. So it doesn't have quite as many inputs as its big brother does, doesn't have quite as many advanced features that you might need in a more studio-oriented environment. And if we need some of those things, that's where Pearl 2 comes into play as the top of the line, really the all-in-one studio in a box kind of production system. So let's take a look at Pearl Nano in a little bit more detail. We have been using this this term of the perfect fit streamer and recorder, and what we mean by that is that it's great in a lot of different scenarios where we just need simplicity, but we also want something that is going to deliver the same quality and flexibility that the Pearl family offers. Currently, it can capture, stream, and record in full HD. It has options for built-in splitting and scaling. It has 2 video inputs, plus we can optionally use some network-based inputs as well. It has a 2.2-inch front screen built into it with some buttons to control a menu system on that screen, which is something you don't see in most other devices in this class. It has 2 XLR audio inputs on it, and I'll show you what the back looks like in a moment, which makes a big difference again in this class where you don't often see professional audio inputs, and Nano does have that. You also have flexibility in your recording media options. You can use the SD card on the front of the device, or there is an expansion bay underneath that you can populate with an M.2 SATA SSD if you want to use a more permanent storage installation instead. Around the back is where all the I/O is. So There's a couple of things here to highlight. One is that, there is the option of using its standard included in the box 12-volt DC power jack, but you can also power a Nano using PoE+. So it's something where if your network infrastructure, you're using PoE switches that can provide us PoE+ power, you don't need to plug Nano into the mains or have that external power supply. You can do it just over PoE+. This is a great flexibility point for different installation needs. And then there's all the video and audio inputs and outputs, of course. So there's a USB port that we can use for external storage or that we can use for USB audio input. There's an HDMI out port, which is programmable. So this could be our local console or assigned to maybe show our program feed or a multi-viewer of our inputs. The network jack, of course, not only for PoE+, but as a network appliance and a streaming recorder. And that's pretty important as an interface, gigabit Ethernet there that we can use for all of those things. There's an SDI input. There's an HDMI input, and that HDMI input has a pass-through output as well, which is a zero latency loop through. So that's where that kind of built-in splitting functionality comes from, which means that it would be very easy to have maybe the HDMI input from a presenter's laptop and loop that through that pass-through port to the projector or in-room display without the need for an external splitter or other devices, keeping the amount of equipment we're bringing on site to a minimum. From an audio perspective, of course, we can capture embedded audio on HDMI and SDI, but we also have RCA inputs there for more consumer level signals. But most importantly, we have the XLR inputs for professional audio. Now, these are line level inputs, so we do need a mixer or a preamp in front of it, but typically we'd be taking the main out from a larger mixer that has multiple microphones potentially and bringing that in over the balanced stereo pair on XLRs. But what if we need maybe a little bit more production capability? And that's where Pearl Mini starts to come into play. Again, capture, stream, and record in up to full HD. One of the biggest differences here is that we now also introduce the options for switching on the device. So we have up to 3 video inputs, including some network-based options. We have a 7-inch touchscreen built into the front of the device that we can use for confidence monitoring, switching, start-stop control, and a bunch of different functions. We have 2 XLR TRS combo jacks on the back for analog audio, and these can be line level or microphone level and can even provide phantom power. So again, from a standalone perspective, Pearl Mini is actually the sweet spot where it has really the most flexibility in terms of audio and standalone options for kind of a condensed all-in-one device. We can use an SD card slot for storage on the front. And again, we can choose kind of whichever media we need for that. Around the back, it looks very familiar. There's just kind of more of it. Unfortunately, as we're moving up into a higher powered device, we can't power over PoE anymore. So we do need to use a 12-volt DC jack there. But we start to see a lot more of other things. So there's 2 USB ports, which can be used for external storage, keyboard, mice for local console, or we can use it for audio or even video inputs over USB. So like a webcam or a USB document camera, that sort of thing. We have our HDMI output, which is again programmable like the Nano, where we could send a program feed out or a multi-viewer or a local console. Our gigabit Ethernet, our SDI input, and now we have 2 HDMI inputs. So we have 3 direct inputs on the Pearl Mini. Audio-wise, we've added a little bit more here, and I already mentioned some of it, but flexibility-wise, Mini is the best. We can capture embedded audio on HDMI and SDI, of course. We also have those RCA jacks like its little brother and Nano does. But in addition to that, we also have a 3.5 millimeter microphone input as well. And then maybe most importantly, the XLR TRS combo jacks that, as I mentioned already, can be line or mic level and even provide phantom power. One of the ways that this is so flexible is it means we could have, maybe 2 cameras and a presentation for our 3 video inputs, and then we could even drive 2 microphones directly off of Pearl Mini without the need for an external mixer or preamp. We could do everything standalone built into the box, and of course with that front touch screen, it's very easy to monitor all these pieces. But then what if we need a little bit more? Maybe we need 4 inputs, 5 inputs, maybe even 6 inputs. That's where Pearl 2 comes into play. So we start adding a lot more capability and really start getting closer to that, studio box. So we have options for capturing, streaming, and recording for up to 4K with Pearl 2. If we're using it in HD, we can have as many as 6 inputs with network-based inputs as options, including we start to add things like NDI support for network-based inputs. It does have a smaller touchscreen than Mini. It's a 4-inch touchscreen, and that's partially because there are rack mount versions available for Pearl 2. And so obviously to keep it as a 2U rack size, screen does need to be a little bit smaller. We have 4 XLR jacks that we can use for 2 balanced stereo pairs of 4 monos at line level. Has a built-in 500 gig SSD for the recordings. And again, we're adding some more advanced production features like support for NDI inputs, NDI outputs, and even chroma keying if we're using green screens. Around the back, again, you're going to see it's pretty familiar compared to the other models. You'll see one difference here is that we now have a built-in power supply with a standard power plug connector, so you can use pretty much any off-the-shelf power connector that everyone has a box of laying around, which also makes it really easy for regional differences. We have the audio inputs, the 4 XLR audio inputs. We have 4 HDMI inputs, 2 SDI inputs, and from a 4K perspective, 2 of these HDMI inputs are capable of 4K, and the SDI inputs are 12G SDI supporting 4K. We have 2 HDMI outputs. Again, these are both programmable, so we can choose whether this is local console or multi-viewer, and they can be assigned differently. So we have a little bit more flexibility on how we use those. We have 2 USB inputs that we can use for storage, external audio, external video, keyboard, mice if we're doing local console, and then of course, gigabit Ethernet. So as I mentioned before, this is really, when we look at these 3 models, it is a little bit of small, medium, large. How many inputs do we need? Do we need some full production systems like switching on the same device? Or are we putting it at the end of another production system where we might only need a single input on our encoder? Essentially, within the Pearl family, we have a device for just about every need. It's just a question of what it is that you need, how much you're trying to condense into a single device. I will say anecdotally that most of our live event customers globally have gone with either the Pearl 2 for their larger events. So for example, if they have a rack filled with a lot of gear for maybe the keynote presentation at a large conference, often we see the Pearl 2 in that scenario, where for maybe breakout rooms or smaller deployments, it's extremely popular to see the Pearl Mini. Now, Pearl Nano was most recently released, and so we're starting to see that ramp up, and that is kind of, still seeing how people are using it. But in many cases, it's being placed at the end of an existing production workflow. They already have larger broadcast style mixers and switchers, and they're looking for just a reliable, durable, simple, kind of bulletproof hardware encoder to just put at the end of that chain, and Nano is the perfect fit for that. So I want to dive into a little bit of a live demo and I'll keep this fairly brief, just to be cognizant of people's time, and we want to obviously get to your questions. So if you have any questions, please make sure to throw them into chat, and the guys will be keeping an eye on that, and we'll get to it. So to do that, I'm just going to change over here to another tab. And what I'm looking at right now is one of my test accounts for Epiphan Cloud. You can see here that I have multiple Pearl devices paired to this account. I have a Pearl Nano, I have a Pearl 2, I have some Pearl Minis, and essentially within Cloud, I can monitor what's happening with these devices. And for this demo, I'm going to focus on Pearl 2 since it obviously has the most features. I'll work on showing that off. But when I'm looking at Pearl 2 here in Cloud, I can dig down into some of its status. I can understand its uptime. I can look at its storage status. I can look at its serial number, its firmware version, all these kind of different pieces. I can
George,
also,
just a
yeah, sorry.
quick question. Sorry for interrupting you. We got a question. Hello, does Pearl 2 have any licenses related, for example, video input 4K? Does enable for or something like that? So question is anything needed to be enabled additionally?
Right, and the answer is yes. So Pearl 2 comes as a base, which is limited to full HD, and then there is an add-on license to unlock the 4K features. So that would unlock 4K inputs, 4K encoding for streaming and recording, and also using the HDMI outputs in 4K. So yes, it is just a license. So it's something where you could buy Pearl 2 at a base configuration today because maybe you don't need 4K yet, and then a few weeks or months from now you need 4K at that point. You could enable that license later on without needing to make any hardware changes.
Okay, Tarmo, that was your question. Are you satisfied with that answer? You will find the pricing in our price list for that. Okay, thanks, George.
Yeah, no problem. So when we're diving in and looking at these, I can look at my different encoding channels. You can see I have a number of them set up here on this device. I can start recording. I could select a stream destination, even create a new stream destination through Cloud and start that if I wanted to. I can look at what inputs are connected and what resolution they are. I can set custom alerts. I can manage configuration presets from the cloud. And so this is all makes it so easy to do this remotely. All these devices I was looking at are located in our office. I am not there, I'm in my home. And so I can still manage to do all of these things. And one of the best ones, of course, is the full remote login. And what this allows me to do is log into the full administrator interface of the Pearl 2 entirely remotely. I'm just going to zoom in my tab there so you guys can see it a bit better. From here, I mean, this is the deepest level of access there is on a Pearl 2, so I can do anything I might need on this Pearl completely remotely. Now, I'm not going to go through every single menu item because that takes up a lot of time. I'm going to focus on some of the things that matter most. But some of the system level configuration things, are going to be logical and make sense here. Things like time and date, network settings, some of those security settings like we talked about in the slides, firmware upgrade pages, those sorts of things. That's all, makes a lot of sense and is pretty easy. Some of the things I do want to highlight, for example, might be automatic file upload, right? This is a system where we can choose how we offload recorded files from the Pearl. We can direct it to a network-based storage device using protocols like FTP, SFTP, Windows Share, Samba Server, even external USB, even something to AWS S3, those kind of things. And this can be automatic so that as Pearl continues to record, it just pushes those off. I know of some live event customers that deploy multiple Pearls in the same kind of conference facility, and they set up their own network for it. And on that network, they also have a NAS, network attached storage, and they have all of the Pearls funneling that data back to that NAS where their editing team can then pull those files down and do the post-production that way. So that's maybe a little bit more of a larger, sophisticated setup, but that's one of the ways that the automatic file upload rules can really help. The Epiphan Cloud stuff, that just would give us the pairing code for how we pair it to our cloud account, so that's nice and easy. If for some reason, although I don't see this a lot within live event production, but I could be done, all Pearls have the option of being registered and paired as an asset within content management systems like Kaltura and Panopto. Now, obviously, this is much more important in the education sector, but it is something we see at the enterprise level as well. So just something to keep in mind if you're encountering those platforms. Pearls can be an amazing capture agent for those two platforms as well. On the output ports, this is how we can control our what we're sending out over those HDMI output ports. So I can send an input directly. I could send one of my encoding channels. I could even configure a multi-viewer, and this is actually a new feature that was released on Monday as a firmware update to all Pearls, where I can now define a grid view multi-viewer of different inputs or different encoders, and I don't need to, previously, for anyone who has experience using Pearls, previously you had to create an encoding channel that created that grid view and then assign it to an HDMI output, which created a much higher system load scenario on the Pearl for something that really was fairly basic. We no longer need to do that. Now we can use our encoding channels for what they're supposed to do, which is encoding for streaming and recording. But if we need a multi-viewer, which is definitely extremely popular in the live production space, we can now do that with the HDMI outputs directly and choose in that grid view what we want it to look like. And you can see here, we can do it as a 1x2, 2x2, or 2x3 to grid view and choose what we want to assign to those grids. So now, of course, because this is a Pearl 2, I also have a second HDMI output that I could do something maybe like local console. So one output could be my grid view, multi-view, one could be my local console, and run them both at the same time. From an input perspective, you can see all the various different inputs here. For demonstration purposes, these were all renamed, but some of these are the HDMI inputs, some of these are the SDI inputs, and some of these you'll notice are also SRT inputs, and these are SRT stream inputs that we can configure to use for a variety of different functions. And I'll probably touch on this a little bit more, but one of the things we're starting to see a lot, especially as we come out of the pandemic, is hybrid events where we're using, we have limited number of people that can be in one physical location. And so we might have multiple locations, either widespread or even just rooms more locally. SRT streaming between encoders can be a fantastic tool to link these sites together. So for example, we could use a Pearl Nano or a Pearl Mini at a remote site to give us a contribution stream over SRT, ingest that into our Pearl 2 as an input, and mix it together with other video signals. And this is something we're seeing more and more these days. Creating those is very easy. This is also how we would add an NDI input to Pearl. Very straightforward. Of course, all the other video inputs are digital, right? So there's really not much to configure there. We automatically detect what the input resolution is, like on this HDMI input. We can see a snapshot of what's coming in from that feed. I could even set a custom no signal picture if I wanted to. So if I need to maybe fine tune things a little bit so that it's something branded or a little bit more unique, I can easily do that per input. So if I don't have something like that configured, it gives me just this boring no signal picture, but I can enhance that by choosing my own image. Most importantly, part of Pearls is the channels. And the first thing I'll note here is when we're talking about channels on a Pearl, the terminology and the way we're using that term is a little bit different than how that term is used from traditional broadcast devices. In the context of a Pearl, when we're talking about channels, we're talking about our encoders, encoded outputs. Now on a Pearl 2, we can have as many as 6 simultaneous encoding channels at full HD. You can see I have 5 on this particular unit. That means that we can use these for different purposes. One might be our main mixed and switched program feed, encoded, streamed, and recorded. The others could be ISO recordings or some other program mix that we're also simultaneously streaming and recording. This gives us huge advantages for being able to multitask on a single device, right? So traditionally speaking, you might have one hardware encoder that only sends out one encoded stream, like Pearl Nano, for example. On something like Pearl 2, it's like having 6 of those single encoders on one device. So this gives us a ton of flexibility. So to give you an idea, you know, this one is set up as just an ISO recording of a camera input. You know, that's all it's really doing. It doesn't really have any layouts. It just has a single layout with that camera input, full screen. We're going to record it. But if we want to go beyond that, we want to add some other pieces, then, you know, we might have other channels with multiple layouts. Now this device has been set up in a particular way, but you can see this one has 2 different layouts that I can switch between. These are actually some live shots of our very empty and very lonely studio in our office. But you know, with this, it's very easy for us to build these layouts. As I mentioned during the slide presentation, it's free form click and drag style interface, right? So I could add multiple video inputs to this and choose how I want to define what this looks like. I could add images as a background if I wanted to. So let me see if I have a really nice one here. Maybe this nice colorful background, but I need to make sure that that's my background as a bottom layer. Very easy to logically organize that. Now I can overlay my video pieces on top and choose where I want to do it. If I want to play around with cropping, I can easily crop either freeform or a fixed resolution or a fixed aspect ratio. You know, whatever I need to do, I can play around with that as well. If I want to use chroma keying, I could do that here as well. That's not a great input to demonstrate chroma keying with, but the chroma keying is you know, on Pearl 2 is exactly what you would expect for any chroma keying. I can come in here, sample a color, key it out, play with the thresholds, and do that. So it's very simple and easy to use. Pretty much anybody can learn how to use this in terms of it's click and drag, right? I could teach my mother to do this. So you could do a lot with this. It's really only limited by your creativity. Image-wise, we can use JPEG images or transparent PNG images. If we want to add, you know, transparency for bug overlays, branding, that sort of thing. Click and drag to choose how we want to define it. Create multiple layouts, and then I can live switch between them here as an administrator just by choosing the active shot. Or I could even open up Epiphan Live, which is the other web browser-based UI, and I can choose what it is I want to monitor in these tiles. And I can also go into the switching part of it, and you know, it's going to show me those different layouts I have created. I can queue them up, switch them when I'm ready to go live. And this interface is much more visual. You can see it's actually showing a live feed there. So this is fantastic to hand off to the day-to-day operators and how they might use it. This is very similar to how the front touchscreen functions for switching. You have thumbnails of your different layouts along the bottom, a preview, and a live side to queue them. So lots of ways to do it, lots of easy ways to manage it. Of course, again, I've been doing all of this remotely on a device that is not located where I am. Encoding setting wise, pretty standard stuff you'd expect for any encoding settings. You could set your frame size, frame rate, bit rate, audio options. You know, that's all pretty straightforward. Streaming wise, we can create multiple stream types from RTMP, RTMPS to SRT outputs, HLS push for publishing, MPEG-, NDI outputs on Perl 2, and we can even create multiple of these per encoder. So each channel could have multiple streamed outputs. So for example, if we have the bandwidth to support it and we want to stream to Facebook, YouTube, Vimeo, whatever platforms all at the same time, we can do that directly on Perl if we have the bandwidth to support it. As long as they can all share the same encoding settings, we can do that from one encoding channel. And then of course, we can be recording at the same time, where we can choose, as I mentioned in the slides, different container types that's going to fit best with our post-production workflow. And that's kind of the high level overview. I would love to get to people's questions and see what people have on their mind.
Okay, guys, let's not be shy. Does anybody have some questions for George? You have the perfect opportunity now to get the best knowledge at your fingertips from the guy who knows it pretty much the best in the whole world. George, it looks like you were crystal clear in everything you told, because I don't see any questions coming.
Excellent. Well, I mean, I want to be cognizant of people's time. I know it's very valuable, and people are busy these days, which is fantastic. Things are ramping back up as we seem to be coming out of this pandemic now, which is really exciting. You know, I personally cannot wait until we start to get back into actual live events and traveling again for them. I'm very anxious to see not only the team over there, you know, with Exertis, but also all of you. Hopefully, fingers crossed, really big hoping here, fingers crossed, that my next opportunity to see everyone in person will be in December at IBC. So we'll keep hoping, keep pushing forward and see that happen. You know, thanks for watching, everyone. Really appreciate your time today. Of course, if you have any questions that you think of later on.
There is one, George, real quick. Somebody, Julio has asked, you mentioned that the Nano has an M2 slot. Mm-hmm. What about the other systems? Any other ones have the M2 slot?
Not at the moment. They do not. No. Yeah, just the Nano. Funny enough, in terms of development of the products, Pearl 2 came first, Pearl Mini came second, and Pearl Nano is the most recent, just released this year. So in terms of lessons learned and choices added, Nano kind of has that, as it was the most recently developed. And that's something that was you know, basically came out of feedback from the Pearl Mini. And you know, just kind of fun story. We released Pearl 2 with the built-in SSD, and everyone said, yeah, but what about SD cards? And so we released Pearl Mini with SD cards, and everyone said, yeah, but what about a built-in SSD? So we made Nano with that option. So that's the fun game of getting customer feedback, which we absolutely love. But that does mean that later products sometimes have more flexibility. So just a fun anecdote for everyone there.
Yeah, that's understandable. Okay, thanks a lot, George. Those were all the questions that have come up. We really very much appreciate your time and your presentation here, and we look forward, as well as you do, that we can all see each other again face to face sooner than later. And until then, if anybody has any other questions, please feel free to contact your local salesperson in the COMM-TEC Exertis organization. Of course, you can call me anytime. Sergej is also here. The whole team is here to support you. Please don't be shy. Let us know what your questions are, and we'll be happy to help.
That's great. Thanks, everyone. Appreciate your time today. And that's great. Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Have a good day.
Bye.